Bye.
The fight for control of the Senate is just as competitive a fight as the lower house. The government won a narrow majority in the Senate last election, but for decades before that, the Senate was controlled by the opposition parties. So who will control the upper house this time round? I'm joined by both Northern Territory Senators, Labor's Trish Crossin and CLP Senator Nigel Scullion. Both of you, welcome to the program. Nigel Scullion, if I can start with you, it's nigh on impossible that either yourself or Trish Crossin will lose your spot. But what's your prediction for the makeup of the Senate as a whole?
Well, first of all, I don't take getting elected for granted in any event. But in terms of the Senate, the forward-looking Senate, there are a couple of very serious options, and very serious in a very negative sense. I certainly think if Labor are returned with the Greens in power, and a lot of pundits have said that is a possibility, it'll be an absolute disaster. Not only will we have Labor all over, so there's absolutely sort of no checks and balances about Labor across Australia, but we'll also have the Greens in the Senate. So you can imagine the scenario where Kevin Rudd's saying, well, to get my policies in, exactly what am I going to have to agree on? Am I going to have to agree on the Greens policy of tearing up a private health scheme? Am I going to have to agree with tearing up the baby bonus? Am I going to have to agree with reintroducing excise increments on fuel? I mean, these are, no child in poverty without an injecting room. They're all pretty horrific.
So you're fairly confident that the Greens will hold the balance of power in the Senate?
Not at all. I'm not confident that's the case, but I'm saying if that's one of the scenarios, we all should be dreadfully concerned. And I'd recommend certainly Territorians and anybody else that you can speak to supporting the Greens in the Senate are supporting a radical left-wing organisation that is not representative of the wider Australian views, and that's the danger.
Well, Trish Crossin, how do you see it panning out tomorrow in the Senate? What's your forecast?
Well, I think the disaster that has been in place in this country since the middle of 2005 is that the Howard government has controlled both the lower and the upper house. They've had total control of the Senate, and we've seen that when they've rammed work choices legislation through, and then we've seen it when they rammed the legislation through to have the nuclear waste dump in the Territory.
Do you think they'll maintain that control?
Well, they only hold the balance of power in the Senate by one vote, and I would say, looking at the polls, even if there's just a slight swing to the Labor Party, they will lose that control. I think that's a good thing. I think if there is quite a swing on to the Labor Party, it would be almost impossible for us to get control of the Senate. We'd need to win almost 4 out of 6 seats in most of the states and 3 in the others, and I think that's going to be a very hard task to do. So I actually am predicting that the Democrats' vote will plummet massively, and then I think the Greens will pick up at least 2 senators, and they will hold the balance of power in the next parliament.
Do you hold the same fears that Nigel Scullion does if the Greens do hold the balance of power? Do you think that will cause an obstacle for Labor if it does win in the House of Reps?
Oh, well, before 2005, for the period of years I've been in opposition, we've had to negotiate. And remember, we had the minor parties plus Labor had the power in the Senate then, and the government didn't. We've been used to negotiating with the Greens and the Democrats all the time. We do it on a daily basis. I think there will be challenges for either party, but I think we can work our way through that. It'll take a lot of time and a lot of effort, but I think it is better than having one party having total control of both houses.
I'll get onto that in a moment, but there's even been talk of the Greens Senate candidate Kerry Tucker in the ACT taking the spot from the Liberals' Gary Humphries, because as Territory Senators you have to be re-elected you stand for re-election every 4 years, 3 years, sorry. Internally, what are your parties saying about the prospect of that happening and potentially the coalition losing the balance of power in the Senate as early as Monday?
Well, our party has said that tomorrow is still a big challenge for us. We really have focused our attention on the House of Representatives. We need 16 seats to win government. I find it quite amazing to think that you wouldn't return one senator for each of the major parties in both of the territories. I mean, let's face it, a third of the people will vote for the Labor Party tomorrow, a third will vote for the Liberal Party, and that's the third in the middle we're both vying for. That's the swinging group. I can't believe of the 420,000 people in the ACT that perhaps the figures would be different. There would need to be a massive swing, I think, away from the Howard government for them not to get Gary Humphries re-elected in ACT.
Nigel Scullion, have you read anything about your coalition colleague in the ACT, Gary Humphries, and whether he's under threat?
What I know is that Gary Humphries is a very, very capable individual. He used to be the Chief Minister of the Australian Capital Territory. He's a very capable individual, and I tend to agree with Trish on her assessment. It was going to be a very big ask to get a change in the Senate on Monday. Look, I'll have to say, just in response to Trish's contribution about us ramming things through the Senate, in the previous Labor terms, they used the guillotine 221 times, and we're down to about 116, so it's about half. We've been very, very responsible in our use of the Senate. And I think
you don't accept at all, as Labor and the minor parties have said, that the Senate no longer was a house of review for legislation.
Well, it certainly was. We put in over. We have a record number of issues that have been put to committee. A record number. This of the last year.
Although the length
record
of time
number
for which they were heard was
well,
probably diminished.
Work choices, 36 hours. The world record, 36 hours in the Senate. So that was hardly sort of cut short. There was further hours used in similar and associated legislation. So we've certainly ensured that there is a full consideration of those matters before the Senate. In fact, most recently, the intervention, the emergency legislation, 27 hours, and Trish participated in that herself. I led that legislation through the Senate, and there was no further questions to answer when we sat down. There was no guillotining whatsoever.
Although, do you think the coalition's dominance in both the lower and upper houses has somehow led to the situation the coalition is in now, with Labor leading in the polls?
Well, not at all. I think people need to recognise that the reason that we have the numbers in the Senate is because Australia has a great deal of confidence in the coalition government. And I'm quite sure that confidence will be maintained. I know that many of the polls they're up and down. They're saying that we won't be returned. I think Australians have a great deal of confidence in people, particularly in the coalition, and I think that that's exactly the way they're going to continue to vote. And I'm very confident that I know that we'll be some of our majority will be eroded, but I'm confident that we'll be returned.
Well, one final question for both of you.
Can I just say, though, that is so not true, Nigel. I mean, I think the confidence that people have had in your party since 2005 has now been seriously eroded. The Liberal Party sought to change the committee system in the Senate so that they totally control all of the Senate committees now. The opposition no longer controls any committee. And you talk about work choices legislation. That had a Senate committee inquiry 4 days. Because the Liberal Party controls the Senate, they said you could only have 4 witnesses per party, which is unprecedented. Normally a Senate committee hears from as many witnesses as it wants. So there's been a very tight restriction on the amount of review and accountability from this government since they've had control of that Senate.
I just have one final question for you both. Both of you have been accused of misleading your constituents about opposing aspects of certain policies and then voting for them in the Senate. Trish Crossin, you said you'd abstain from the vote on the intervention and then you voted for it. So publicly opposing legislation that you later vote for, do you think that's eroded people's confidence in the Senate as the House that represents the interests of states and territories?
I think what you do...
Are you towing the party line?
Well, what you do in opposition, when you see a piece of legislation, you certainly say to yourself, if this legislation cannot guarantee me these certain conditions, then I won't be supporting it. You then take those views into your party room. You've got to remember we put up 6 amendments to the legislation. They were the issues that I was concerned about. My party accepted my views about that. We put those amendments up. We voted for the intervention at the end of the day because there is aspects of it that we do support. There's a lot of it that we don't support.
Nigel Scullion, I'll have to ask you, you said not on your watch to a nuclear waste repository in the Northern Territory and then you voted for it. Don't you think the public's confidence has been eroded that the Senate is actually in the interests, representing the interests of states and territories?
Not at all. When I said not on my watch, I had an assurance from the then Minister Ian Campbell that it was not going in the Northern Territory, and I said it wasn't on my watch. When they said it was going in the Northern Territory, I said I'd only support it, so I spent 7 weeks looking forensically into exactly what was happening. I took the concerns of Territorians into account. I introduced a raft of amendments that took that into consideration, and then I voted for it. But not until I'd actually taken the Territory's views into consideration, which is my principal role.
I'm sorry, we'll have to wrap it up, but good luck to you both of you tomorrow, and thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.